Two major events happened today. One is the announcement that the Lebanese army has taken control over parts of its own territory. And believe me, that's shocking. I'll explain why. And the second is that the British Foreign Office has issued a ban on entry into the country for two bloggers from America, which is also absolutely shocking to that part of the public that thinks about freedom of speech and other freedoms that generally we would like to have. I'll tell you about both situations. With great regret, I have to say that Europe is sliding further and further into the Middle Ages, to put it mildly, although there are some encouraging signs in Europe as well. But, so to speak, I'll tell you about that too. Let's start, of course, with this situation, with Europe, and then we'll move on to the Middle East, where paradoxically the fate of the war in Iran depends on the Lebanese army, which in fact does not yet exist. That is, there is a name, so to speak. But in reality, seriously, there is no army. But as my favorite anti-Semites say, the cunning Jews will definitely come up with something, well, to get what they want here. We'll come up with something, I promise. Well, as I said at the beginning, once great, now just Britain. So the global sensation was that two Americans were not allowed into Britain. You might ask, what's so sensational about that? Maybe they were some kind of gangsters or bloody murderers. No, not smugglers. They didn't even trade weapons. Not people with a suitcase, cash, and a fake passport. Two people whose only crime was a microphone and their own opinion. That's what they were punished for. So Hassan Piker and Cenk Uyghur were supposed to perform at a festival in London. Everyone was supposed to perform at the festival in London. The British Foreign Office cancelled it for them. That is, first they issued it, then they checked, and they cancelled their entry permit with a wording that shocked everyone, really shocked them. Anyone who knows the history of this country, Great Britain, should go cold inside at that. The presence of the aforementioned individuals and so on in Great Britain may not be in the public interest. May not be in the public interest. Couldn't you just take them to court? The public good. Well, we've heard that a couple of times too, right? Remember this word. I was about to say nonsense, but let's call it a phrase. We'll come back to it. We'll come back. Because over the past 100 years, people have been coming into Britain who threatened this very public good much more seriously than two talkative bloggers. And they were let in, but more on them later. So, freedom of speech is not tested by whether you allow people to say things you like. It's tested by whether you allow people to say things you find disgusting, but still let them speak. But for now, let's ask ourselves one thing. As a country that literally gave the world, well, the modern world, right? Of course, there was Greece, there was Rome, there was, so to speak, the ancient East, right? But it was this country that gave the world the idea of free speech. It has come to the point where it's afraid of the opinions of two bloggers, but it doesn't even matter if they're bloggers or not. Just a person with their own opinion. Whose tradition is that anyway? Well, again, so to speak, in our modern society. If freedom of speech has a homeland, it's the island between the North Sea and the Atlantic. It's here. In 1644, yes. John Milton, whom you surely know, wrote his Areopagitica, the first great text against censorship. Gentlemen, this is the earliest significant text opposing censorship, where it is said, "Let truth and falsehood grapple in open combat, and you will never see truth lose." No, that's a debatable assumption, of course, right? But I completely agree with him. Let them grapple in a fair fight. And here, in the same United Kingdom in 1859, John Stuart Mill, I think it's pronounced, wrote a book called On Liberty, simply On Liberty, from which, well, all modern defense of the right to speak unpopular opinions grew. This is in London, in Hyde Park, and gentlemen, we've heard this since childhood, right? Since 1870 or 1872, there has been the so-called Speaker's Corner. It was always shown as a curiosity on all sorts of TV programs. It appeared in movies many times. Here, anyone could come on Sundays. You could bring a barrel with you, climb on it, or something like that, and say anything you wanted about the Queen, about God, about the government. And it wasn't exactly what the police liked. But the police were protecting not the public from the speaker, but the speaker from the public. They'd say, let him say what he wants to say. What are you doing? That's not even the most astonishing part. The most astonishing thing is who Britain was sheltering. The 19th century. All across Europe, monarchs are suppressing revolutionaries. Where do the revolutionaries flee? To London. Karl Marx lived in London for more than 30 years. He wrote Capital there, the book, which would later turn half the world upside down, and he died as a British guest. He is buried at Highgate. Well, what's it called? Highgate Club, the cemetery, I think is what it's called. Highgate, something like that. I mean, of course it would have been better if they had sent him to the galleys there. Naturally, yes, but, well, also Russian rebels lived in London too. There was Herzen, Kropotkin. And Lenin used to drop by. He would browse through books at the British Museum and calmly planned what he was planning. Italians, Mazzini, Garibaldi. French communards, Poles, Germans. The entire rebellious continent knew that if you were persecuted for your ideas, there was one island from which you wouldn't be extradited. Think about it. Britain gave shelter to people. Shelter. Shelter to people who openly, publicly, in print called for the overthrow of the government. Their own. Not just the British government, but the British government too. The British government too, yes. And Great Britain did not flinch. Because at the core was a principle that this country was truly proud of. We don't judge a person for what's in their mind or on their tongue. We judge them for what they do with their hands. We need to honestly remember who Britain kept the door open for over the decades. Not for mere talkers, but for preachers of bloodshed. In the 2000s, intelligence agencies worldwide gave London a fitting nickname, which doesn't need repeating. Simply because you already know it yourself. So imagine London even became something like the Islamist capital. The nickname was well-deserved. For years, Abu Hamza al-Masri preached at a mosque in North London. I really hope you know this name. The man with a hook instead of a hand. He called for jihad, for murder, recruited militants. His words later echoed in terrorist attacks. Britain tolerated him for years. Well, in the end, it wasn't the British court that put him in check, but the Americans pressured them. And, well, they had to hand him over. He was convicted of terrorism, of course. They sentenced him to 3 life sentences. Next to him is Abu Qatada, who was directly called a spiritual authority connected to Al-Qaeda in court. How many years did he live in Britain fighting deportation? I think it was 20. For 20 years, the country couldn't get rid of a man whom its own judges considered a threat. There was also Omar Bakri Mohammed. He was the founder of an organization that openly praised the perpetrators of September 11th, calling them a magnificent team. He lived in Britain, received government benefits, and preached until he left himself. And now he has moved, turning over a new page, to another country, the one that is flowing with gold. London got a second nickname, also quite telling. By the way, London had a Russian suffix added to it. The city became a laundromat for money. The origin of which, well, probably shouldn't be specified, just in case. Fortunes flowed here, made in ways that would get you jailed in their country of origin, or simply killed. Oligarchs, fugitives with billions, people whose fortunes didn't smell like perfume. They bought mansions, clubs, newspapers, status. Everything was great. Money doesn't smell. An investor's passport smells nice. Let's sum up the interim results, and let's do it slowly. So a person who preaches violence, years of protection, money with a dark past gets a warm welcome, that is, a hot one. And for 2 Americans with loud opinions about the Middle Eastern war, your presence does not serve the public good. Something doesn't add up here, right, isn't it? And it doesn't add up by accident. It says something about the country.
Yeah.
Well, let's figure out what they're afraid of. Let's ask ourselves an honest question. How is an unarmed person with an opinion more dangerous than a preacher of violence and dirty billions? The answer is simple but unpleasant. The preacher shouts on the outskirts. He's easy to isolate if needed. Call him crazy. Show him as an outsider. The oligarch doesn't say anything to the public at all. He buys silence. right? But a clear, charismatic person who plainly says what part of society already feels he's dangerous in a different way. Not because he'll blow something up, but because he'll convince people. And then, they say, let's fight for the Jews. Yeah, who cares? Let's fight for capitalism. Yeah, who cares about that? And then people come who can take our power away. Those are the ones we'll fight, the power that can be convinced. She argues confidently, sure of being right. But power that isn't sure it's right silences everyone. Those who can might turn out to be unnecessary rivals for them, or they might persuade someone of something. And when you see that the state, instead of responding to an argument, closes the border to the person making that argument, you already know the most important thing about the state. It's not violence that it fears. It is afraid of losing an argument. Pay attention to the form itself. It may not serve the public good. There is no accusation, no charges, no court, but there is an official. Who decided that I, citizen of Great Britain, will not let you hear this person? That is, I have already decided for you what you can listen to and what you cannot, what is forbidden. And if we call things by their proper names, this means only one thing. The Briton is treated as a subject, as an unreasonable child, who needs to be protected from bad words, and then everything will be fine. Freedom. A free person would be offended by such care, but an unfree person gets used to it. I'm afraid that most Britons, though not all, do. But they've relaxed, gotten used to it. Others think for us, provide for us. They give us support in old age. If we're in trouble, they help us. We'll pass on all the points and let someone else decide, someone we call the government. And this is where the story stops being about Great Britain. Because we've already seen this road before. Some of us have walked it ourselves, others have just seen or heard about it, more than once. And immediately a question arises. Where do countries that suppress free speech end up? This path has a certain pattern, and it's absolutely unbreakable. It always starts the same way. Technically, it might be something else, but it always starts out noble. We're not the ones banning criticism, God forbid. No, we're protecting the vulnerable. And we're fighting hatred. By fighting hatred, we're protecting the public good. We, after all, we know what the public good is. We know it, and it needs to be protected. The first to be silenced are always those who irritate the crowd, the ones the crowd doesn't feel sorry for, right? Like, oh, you're such an extremist, or you're such a provocateur, or you're a person with disgusting views. Well, some people think it's disgusting, some people don't, but it's easy. Society just nods in agreement. Fair enough, there's no need to stir things up, no need for hate speech. Britain really did deny entry not only to bloggers, they also didn't let in right-wing provocateurs. There was the Dutchman Wilders. Well, it's true. He filed a lawsuit. And they let him in right away, of course. American activists, especially Austrian nationalists. They were also Austrian school economists at the same time, just so you know. Various scandalous people, personalities. I know you're not supposed to say Personov, but I know Personov. Please don't write to me later below that the worst thing that happened was that I said Personov, and you didn't hear anything else. Every time there was always someone who, well, definitely shouldn't be let in. And it was easy to explain this to the people. That's where the trap is. That's the mousetrap, the one with a piece of cheese, or rather the one that catches everyone who tries to take our cheese. When you agree that the government can decide whose words to let in and whose words not to allow you to hear, you get censorship. And who exactly will be affected by it tomorrow is no longer up to you. You've already given up the right to decide. Today, they don't let in the one you dislike. Well, that's right, I dislike him, so he provokes, he's bad, he spreads hate to someone. That's it. Yes. And tomorrow, what about you? But the authorities dislike him. And the day after tomorrow, it turns out that, oh, wait a second. And now they're silencing our people too, those who, well, someone didn't like. And the final stop of this route is always the same. Ladies and gentlemen, it's just a matter of how far they'll go, how far they'll manage to get. But the final stop is always the same. It doesn't need to be described abstractly, it has specific addresses. These are countries where they first protected society from harmful ideas. And it ended with people being imprisoned for jokes, for reposting, for liking something. These are regimes that started by banning extremist literature, and they ended up with a list of banned books long enough to fill a library. Anyone who studied 20th century history knows these countries by name and remembers what happened there, what was happening there, and how it all ended. The vaults of words. A word doesn't disappear all at once. It doesn't disappear all at once. That's only in books. When you read a story about how someone once lived, on this line, bam, 2 lines, boom, and something happened there. Oh, how did they not notice that? They didn't notice. How did they not react? Just the same way you do, exactly the same, no different. Because everything happens little by little. But if you wait 24 hours, you'll get a whole bucket. They're chipping away at freedom, piece by piece. Each piece, so to speak, is explained as being for your own good. They declare it's for your own good. They demand that you admire it, and you do admire it. The bitterest part here is that Britain once understood all this, before anyone else. They were the first to write that you can't protect the truth by banning lies. It's written by them, even before the French, before anyone else. They first made a place where you could say anything. They were the first to shelter those whom the whole world wanted to silence. The country knew the answer, and now it seems they've decided to bury it. What are we supposed to do with all this now? Don't make the simple mistake of thinking this is an argument about 2 specific Americans, or about one particular war. You might find their views deeply offensive. That doesn't matter at all. That doesn't matter at all. That's the whole point of free speech. It's not tested by speech you like. It's exactly about the words you find disgusting. Even tyrants defend free speech for those they agree with. Only one thing makes you free. It's your willingness to defend the right to speak for someone you can't stand, the right for that person to speak. Not, of course, the one you can tolerate. I said it and thought, maybe I said something wrong, right? But since that's the case, let me recall. It's attributed to Voltaire, but it seems it was actually in a letter to Voltaire. I can't remember right now. It was written by a woman, a French writer, I think. Yes. So she wrote a very remarkable phrase, and now it's attributed to Voltaire, but it's not Catherine the Great, who also corresponded with him. It's not her idea, right? It was written as follows. I hate what you say, but I'm ready to die for your right to say it. Well, I understand that being ready to die or not ready to die, these are probably very beautiful words, but people have died for the right of others to say what they want to say. And one more thing, probably the last one. When the government declares that it protects you from someone else's dangerous words for your own good, ask yourself one simple question, which puts everything in its place. And who decided that this is good? I want it, and it is good for me. Why did he decide this for me? Remember? Gallat Gallipus Gallipus. Hillel. Yes. Do not do to others what you would not want done to you. So please, don't touch. Don't do it. Don't decide for me. I will decide for myself. Because a free person will figure out for himself whom to listen to and whom to believe, and whom not to believe. And if he doesn't figure it out, he'll bump his head a few times. And if there is a free right to free exchange, he'll listen to someone else. But the one whose choice is made by an official, no matter what you call him, is no longer a citizen. He cannot be a citizen. He has already delegated the right to be a citizen to someone else. Britain once opened its doors to the entire rebellious world and was not afraid. I want to believe that the country that invented Speaker's Corner will remember why it built it. Not just to film it for movies and show it off or to take tourists there. There was some other purpose. And we will remember that we heard this argument back when it could still be won. And yet, I don't want to leave you with the feeling that the door is closing. I mean, it has started to close, but it hasn't shut yet, because there is news. Now, this is incredibly pleasant to announce, which speaks of a reverse movement of resistance. It is more important than any ban. On May 7, the British went to the polls, and they did what no one expected from them anymore. The parties that for decades divided power among themselves like an inheritance. They got a slap in the face. A slap they haven't had in living memory. Well, I just can't remember anything like this. The Labour Party lost about 1,500 seats in the councils. Councils are, well, let's call them local councils. Yeah, the Conservatives also took a hit. And for the first time, a force came to the top that the respectable establishment had taught voters to despise. 1,500 new seats. Well, not new. 1,500 new people took those seats. And control over entire counties, like Essex with its robberies. Essex, Suffolk, those are the ones I know. Sunderland. The main British election expert admitted it. More than a quarter of the country voted for those they weren't supposed to. They're supposed to vote for some, but they voted for others. That's not allowed. You can argue about this force. You may not like it, but that's not the point. The point is what's behind it. And what's behind it is simple human fatigue from the same old tone. From the tone that tells you, we know better than you. Better. What should you listen to? What should you read? What should you think? And we know better who to let in and who not to let in into our country. So that he, God forbid, doesn't tell you something that we don't like. That's what this result means. The result is that, guys, we're tired of this. We're just tired of it. Not the victory of one party, but the fact that a person who was long treated like a foolish child suddenly, as they say, stood up for himself and said, hey, I'll decide for myself. I'll decide who to listen to. I'll decide who to believe. I'll decide for myself who will govern me. At least in general, maybe even throw those rulers out altogether. But under the current system, you still have to. Here, remember the line we started with. The one who gouged out the people's eyes still has the nerve to reproach them for being blind. Or wait. No, I wasn't going to, but I didn't say that. Right? Let me say it again. So, the one who gouged out the people's eyes still has the nerve to reproach them for being blind. Cool, right? I can't remember who said that now. Suddenly forgot. So it turns out the people can see after all.
Видел.
They probably saw the whole time. They just stayed silent until the day they spoke in the only language that power can't ignore. Well, honestly, here in California, they easily ignore it, because they can easily rig elections any way they want. Well, okay, let's not get complacent. One election doesn't guarantee anything. Freedom doesn't come back in a single day, just like it doesn't disappear in a single day. You have to win it back piece by piece, just as it was lost. But part of this spring has been regained. And the country that invented Speaker's Corner seems to be starting to remember why it built it in the first place. And here's what we will remember. Freedom of speech is not saved by courts and not granted by parliaments. It is saved by just one person, the one who refused to let others decide what he is allowed to listen to. This spring, there turned out to be 1 million more such people in Britain than those at the top had thought. This is the awakening. Quiet at the polling station without a single shot fired, this is the strongest of all. And now let's talk about what we announced from the very beginning. Namely, Israel is rearming Lebanon, the Lebanese army, to force whom? Iran. To agree to better terms in deals with Trump. Wow.
Wow.
When on June 3rd in Washington they announced the extension of the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, the world heard the usual words, ceasefire there, de-escalation, a return to diplomacy. The cameras showed a handshake. The headlines reported, well, who, how many? There, the most important thing in this matter didn't make it into a single headline. Because the most important things are announced from the podium, they are done quietly, over years, and only those who are used to watching not what is being said, or as they say with the other hand, but what starts to move after those words, understand. Let's take a look together. There was one phrase in the joint statement that's worth focusing on. Pilot zones are being created. Well, what do we care about these pilot zones, in which the Lebanese army takes exclusive control, excluding all non-state armed forces? Whoa, hold on a second. Let's read that again. Non-state armed forces. Is that just a way to avoid saying Hezbollah? So the very word that everyone already has in mind, but which in the official text is replaced with a different wording. Or sometimes they also say construction. The authors of the statement did exactly what a smart, skillful storyteller would do. They didn't name what everyone will name themselves. And that's the whole point of this deal. Because exclusive control by the Lebanese army literally means the following. There will no longer be two armies on a piece of Lebanese land. There will be one. And the second one, well, the one that's not state-run, has to leave. From there, not of their own free will. They have to be pushed out. They don't want to. And who will push them out? Not Israel. Lebanon will push them out with their own soldiers. A question any thoughtful person should consider. Where will the Lebanese army suddenly get the strength to do what it hasn't done, couldn't even think about doing for 30 years? To understand what's happening now, we need to remember what Lebanon was, what the Lebanese army has been all this time. For decades, it was an army of observers, not because there weren't brave people in it, there were plenty of them, but because above it, beside it, and often even over it, there was another force, better armed, seriously funded, and subordinate not to Nibirutu, but to another capital, and not nearby, but hundreds of kilometers to the east. When in one state there are two armies, and one of them is stronger than the other, a state is only called a state. It is actually a territory, a colony. At best, you could say that it is leased out, but that's very strange. Leased when it was taken for rent, but nothing is paid for it. The Lebanese army did not fight against this second force for one simple reason. It would have lost for sure. Everyone knew that. That's why official Lebanon existed in a strange balance. Formally, it was a sovereign country. In reality, it was just a territory. Part of it was controlled by completely foreign interests, foreign money, foreign hands. And now this very army is being asked to take exclusive control, a demand that just yesterday would have sounded like a joke, like mockery. But today something has changed, and that's why it sounds like a plan. So what exactly happened? What was going on while everyone was watching the missiles fly? While the public was following the exchanges and strikes, the casualty reports and who hit whom and how many times, there was a parallel process going on, much less noticeable, but perhaps not less, and maybe even more important. The Lebanese army quietly began to be prepared, systematically, through officer training, through the transfer of equipment, through the establishment of strategic roles. They were trained in how to play these roles, intelligence sharing, through money that doesn't go to defense in general, but to a very specific goal, the ability of this army to one day take the place that another currently holds. In other words, to push out Hezbollah. First from that part from Israel to the Litani, and then from the Litani to the Syrian border. Israel is not acting directly here. That would be political suicide for any Lebanese government. God forbid. They released the Jews. No cabinet in Beirut would survive a photo of an Israeli instructor next to a Lebanese soldier. That's why everything goes through intermediaries, through the American channel, through organizations that officially have nothing to do with it, but in reality they work toward the same goal. Money and weapons don't come with a tag saying they're from Israel. It doesn't say Israel Defense Forces, IDF, right? They come as aid to the legitimate government of Lebanon for the restoration of sovereignty from somewhere over there. Sounds very noble. And in this noble phrasing, there's a calculation hidden, which consists of driving out a foreign armed force from Lebanese soil in one of two ways. The first is to do it yourself, and then you become an occupier, and the whole region rises against you. I mean Israel if they do it. And the second is to nurture a force within the country that will make this its own goal, with their own hands, under the flag of their own sovereignty. The first way creates an enemy, and the second way creates a state and a friend. Well, if they win, of course. That's exactly why the Israeli Minister of Defense can calmly say that his army, while it remains in Lebanon, is not going anywhere. And this is not a contradiction with the truce. It's insurance for the period while the Second Quiet Army is not yet ready. As they say, for the field, and why now? Here, the story probably stops being about Lebanon, and for us, the main thing begins. To understand why all this is happening right now, you need to go one level higher, to where real decisions are made. That is Tehran. Yes, not Beirut, not, let's say, some Lebanese Tripoli on the border with Tripoli, not the one in Libya, but the one in Tripoli on the border with Syria. So, in Tehran, for many years, Iran had a strategy, which can be described in one phrase: to fight by proxy on someone else's soil, not at their own borders, not with their own cities, but through a network of allies, placed throughout the region, like pieces on a chessboard, so to speak, right? Lebanon was the most valuable of these pieces, because from there they could keep Israel in their sights, without risking a single Iranian neighborhood. That is the whole point of a proxy force. It allows you to threaten without exposing yourself to retaliation. As long as this piece stays on the board, Tehran won't make concessions. Why sit down at the table and negotiate if you have a card in your hand that you can threaten with at any moment without paying anything for it? A strong position doesn't make concessions. The one who makes concessions is the one who feels the ground slipping from under his feet. That's why weakening this Lebanese piece is not a local task and not revenge. It's a lever. The logic here is quite simple. It's worth saying it slowly because it contains the essence of the moment. As long as Iran has a strong hand on the Israeli border, Iran negotiates from a position of strength and doesn't give up anything. One hand is Hormuz, the other hand is Hezbollah. If one of these hands is taken away, Iran largely loses what it was threatening with no risk. And a country that cannot threaten cheaply is forced to truly consider the cost of every step. And only then do negotiations turn from a ritual into reality. In other words, disarming Hezbollah should not be done instead of negotiations with Iran, but for the sake of those negotiations. This is not an alternative to diplomacy. This is what makes diplomacy possible. A negotiating table without pressure is just a stage. A negotiating table where one side has had one of its two trump cards knocked out of its hand is already a real conversation. It would be unfair to tell you only the rosy side. Yes, this plan has a cost, and a grown man is obliged to take it into account in conversation. Raising a second army inside a country where the first one is still strong is like playing with fire. Weapons handed over to the legitimate government have a habit of not always staying with the legitimate government. The history of the region is full of cases where the weapons you gave to your friends ended up being used against you a few years later. There are no guarantees. All you can count on is that, well, your interests have aligned for long enough. There's also a second, subtler risk. When you help another country become stronger to achieve your goal, you're creating an entity that will have its own goals tomorrow, right? A strong Lebanese army, which is needed today to drive out a foreign force, will become, well, just a strong Lebanese army the day after tomorrow. With its own will, its own grievances, like 37 years ago, this and that, my grandmother, for example, and with its own memory of who stood behind it. The one who sows strength doesn't always reap gratitude. We know this well in America. And yet this is the main argument, the alternative. As the local boys used to say at the dacha in Rapino near Leningrad, worse, even worse. The alternative is a frozen situation, the status quo, in which an entire country remains a hostage of a foreign army, and through it a hostage of a foreign state, where sovereignty exists only on a piece of paper, so to speak, even just on paper, on a slip of paper, where peace means a pause. Peace is just a pause until the next strike. Between a bad choice and a very bad one, a reasonable person chooses the bad one, and honestly calls it bad, not pretending it's perfect. What's really behind all this? Let's peel off the last layer. This story isn't about weapons or borders, It's about a very old idea that's worth stirring all this up for. The state must have a monopoly on force within its own land, if again it's a state of the type that exists now. Because what I'm proposing in our project, what I'm suggesting, what Galambus suggested, what many people before him suggested, and so on. But Galambus, as it were, put all this together, and I'm trying to convey this to you, a roadmap to freedom. So to speak, go to this channel. There are 10-minute videos there, almost 200 of them. And besides that, everything is also compiled into 16 or 17 hour-long videos. There are about 16 or 17 hour-long videos there. All of this is told, explained, and said. Yes. Well, at the moment we are dealing with states, in which, so to speak, that's how it is right now. Right? So, the state must have a monopoly on force on its own land, not two armies. Just one. Not the state and those who are stronger than the state, just the state where the law is stronger than someone else's gun. Yes, it sounds banal. As long as you live where this doesn't exist, and it stops sounding banal the moment you find yourself there, somewhere like in Lebanon, where someone settles next to your house whom nobody elected, and whom your police are afraid of, and he comes. He's not under the law. He does whatever he wants. Well, at least with the police, you can go somewhere, try to sort things out. Though not always, of course, as we know. Yes, in Russia we know that's not always the case. Then you suddenly realize that the state's monopoly on force is not just a dry phrase from a textbook. That's the difference between a citizen and a hostage. In a modern state, a citizen has also lost many of their rights and is partly a slave and partly a citizen. Yes. Well, what I'm describing is simply a hostage. Period. What is a hostage? A hostage is someone whose fate any field commander can decide at any moment. And he can calmly come to you, take whatever he wants from you, and basically do whatever he wants with you, and no one will even judge him for it. Israel, by helping Lebanon build its own real army, is of course also pursuing its own interests, the security of its cities and the breaking of Iran's front line. But here's an interesting paradox. The paradox is that this cold interest coincided with what Lebanon needs most in the world. Stop being someone else's territory. To become our own country again. This piece of land right here, it's called our country. We do what we want there. Again. Yes, a very small number of people make the decisions, but still. At least it means our people are deciding, and what benefits one person can turn out to be salvation for another. And then calculation stops being just calculation. It becomes mutual understanding. How this quiet armament project will end, we won't find out from a statement. We'll find out on the day when a Lebanese soldier stands for the first time where, for 30 years, another flag had flown. And no one will shoot him in the back. On that day, it will become clear whether the country has managed to turn from a tenant back into an independent state. And on that day, Tehran will, for the first time in many years, count its cards and realize that one of its two main ones is gone. And then we will finally see what real negotiations are worth, not just talk meant to buy time. That's it. I mean, negotiations where people sit down not for show, but because there's no other way anymore. That's all. Until next time.